Here, Dr. Swift down there, who was working with me, is pointing up where the arrow is to a protected area where the Anasazi Indians did their petroglyphs about 1,000 years ago, according to the park rangers. And you climb up there on that little ledge and look at that, and you see a number of the petroglyphs. It's covered with heavy desert varnish so that it's difficult to photograph. But right over my head, you see the Anasazi warrior and then the snakes. But then right beside me, if we highlight the significant area, you can see the dinosaur, which even the secular archaeologists have acknowledged sure looks like a dinosaur, and covered with the varnish so that the antiquity is really not questioned. We go not too far from there, but over into Colorado, we see the three-horned dinosaur with the frill on its back. Looks more like a triceratops than the people. Look like people. This is done by the Fremont Indians, who were contemporary with the Anasazi. And then we go to the Grand Canyon. We see what appears to be in the shape of maybe an Allosaurus. Someone shot him in the tail, which shows you what it looks like if you break through that heavy desert varnish, which indicates its antiquity. There was a write-up by a representative for the American Museum of Natural History in 1924 of this site describing Indians drawing dinosaurs, though they wouldn't do that today. Not because the evidence is not there, they just wouldn't do it. We travel down to Peru, and this is Dr. Javier Cabrera, who was 20 years head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima, retired to be cultural anthropologist in Inca, ancestor of the conquistadors, has a big 300-year-old castle there on the town square, and has a collection of Inca burial stones that begun to be made by his father back in the 30s. He's continued that collection. These are stones that are buried with in the tombs with the Incas, and they have scenes carved over them, most of them. He has a collection now of over 11,000 of these burial stones. About a third of them are the most disgusting pornography you've ever seen, but about a third of them have dinosaurs on them. Here is one in place in the tomb, but looking at a close-up of these stones, you can see the rather artistic rendition of the dinosaur. Interestingly, this one has the dermal frills on its back. When Mr. Sinclair did his sign with the dinosaur, he didn't know that it had frills on its back, but they did it right. This was written up in Geology magazine in 1992 for the first time, when we found them well preserved. But there are thousands of these stones. This is one of the larger ones. Again, rather artistically rendered. Looking at a close-up, you can see the dinosaur in the upper right-hand corner with the man's foot in his mouth. All shapes and sizes and types of stones and styles of rendering. Certainly not done by the same individual. Some of them are almost oriental looking, and some of them rather literal looking. Here's one with a number of different species on it, but thousands of them. We have a number of others who have collected as well. We have a collection at the Aeronautical Museum in Lima. There were hundreds here. There are 40 that are left. They've been raided, I think sold maybe illegally. But you can still see the stones, some of the ones that are not as elaborate and beautiful as in the Cabrera collection, but obviously recognizable. Still in the National Aeronautical Museum, there's also a display in the Naval Museum, and at least 2 other museums that I know of in Peru. Some of them are still being excavated. This was one that was excavated in 2006 that is in the artifact room. It has 2 dinosaurs on it. Slightly different type stone from Cabrera's, raised instead of incised, but still the same general picture. Also in the tombs you find burial cloths with the same kind of motif there. Obviously, the big claws and the teeth representing dinosaurs. You see it on their pottery. That's relatively easy to date. These are dated at about 2,500 years ago. These are the Moshi pots, and the style is well known and documented and represented in the national museums. This one's in the National Museum in Lima. It says circa 2,500 years ago. Up in northern Peru, you have a good deal of gold in some of the ruins and tombs. This is a death mask, but look on either side of the face. Again, the dermal frills across the back, the tail curling up over, and the huge teeth. These people were seeing dinosaurs 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Now, we're told that we've known what dinosaurs look like for maybe, well, the first ones found in 1820, we didn't know what they looked like very well. The restorations were silly. After the turn of the century, early 1900s, we got a fair idea, and really not an excellent idea. And, well, 1992, we learned the Brontosaurus type had frills on its back. These people didn't show a gradation in learning. They got it right from the start. Likewise in Mexico, we've made a number of trips there in central highlands near Acambaro in the state of Guanajuato. Dr. Swift and I have been down there a number of times investigating. It took that many times to get through all the bureaucracy. When we got there, they were being hidden in the back of the police department. But it was a collection made by Waldemar Julsrud back in the early 1900s of some 30,000 ceramic figurines, about 10% of which are of dinosaurs, but a wide range of animals and creatures. Some of the Brontosaurus type were standing up. We didn't know that until recently. Bakker's book, Dinosaur Heresies, published in '86, was really the first one who suggested that. And then, of course, Spielberg convinced us all they stood up. But this is exactly the way they're rendered by the artist, and these date to well before the time of Christ from several sources. Again, there are thousands of them, and the styles indicate far more than one artist. One of the professors from the University of Texas at Arlington, who is an art professor, said there were at least 100 different artists represented in the collection, would be his estimate. This is my wife's favorite. Obviously, if you've got one that looks like a dinosaur, a man did it, but sewing them together is interesting. Man and dinosaur obviously live together. You pick up any of the dinosaur books today, and how does it start out? Millions and millions of years ago. And then the second paragraph says, no man ever saw a dinosaur. And that's just like you can't write a dinosaur book unless you start that way. It ain't so. Year before last, we traveled to Cambodia, following evidence that had been forwarded to us by one of the tour guides there who had seen our website. And we had done some research and confirmed a good bit of what he was telling us. In the upper part of Cambodia, we see the ancient Khmer Empire had built just spectacular temples, maybe the largest and most beautiful in the world. And one of the greatest monument builders was Jayavarman VII. He's almost idolized. This is a picture that I took there in Phnom Penh of the Buddha-like pose. He began to rule in 1181 and built to Prohm and dedicated it in 1186. This was dedicated to his mother. It was a Buddhist monastery. And so we know who and when and all the specifics. Well, on the stone in this temple, a very beautiful, picturesque place, you see carvings, and they're stone carvings that cover just about every square inch of it. But just inside the front entrance, in the corner here that the arrow points to, you can see a series of animals from the jungle. And notice in the series there is a perfect Stegosaurus in a temple from over 800 years ago. And we're supposed to have known what dinosaurs looked like for about 150, and then they've been gone 65 million. I believe there's something wrong with that story. I don't want any comments about two fossils here, or two dinosaurs. They're just one. But it is more proof of the co-occurrence of humans and dinosaurs. Let's think about some significance here of this, acknowledged by the evolutionists before we conclude. Louis Jacobs from SMU is president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, one of the most representative, respected paleontologists in the country. And in his book, Quest for the African Dinosaur, he brings up the subject of the co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs. He said such an association would dispel an earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. This is, of course, his view of it. Evolution would be vanquished. Here's the implication, the significance, if you were to document this. And, of course, I think he's right. We go back to the statement by Stephen Stanley that we referred to earlier, the topsy-turvy fossil man, and look at a fuller context of his quote. He said, "There's an infinite variety of ways in which, since 1859, the general concept of evolution might have been demolished. Consider the fossil record, little-known resource in Darwin's day. The unequivocal discovery of a fossil population of horses in Precambrian rocks would disprove evolution. More generally, any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory, and yet not a single one has come to light. As Darwin recognized, a single geographic inconsistency would have nearly the same power of destruction." But these are his terms: destruction, destroy, disprove. That's the implication if you find humans and dinosaurs together specifically. A single geographic inconsistency. It's interesting to listen to what the evolutionists themselves say about what this would mean. Stanley says it would disprove evolution. Dawkins, referring to another find, says evolution would be utterly destroyed. And then Jacob says evolution would be vanquished. Now, that's not my analysis. That's the leading evolutionists across the country. That's what they say such evidence means. If you've got a single geographic inconsistency, well, I believe we've shown more than a single geographic inconsistency. The Malachite man with the 10 perfectly modern human skeletons, the same formation as Dinosaur National Monument, fossil footprints in Texas and New Mexico and Turkmenistan, 3 different places in Texas, the dinosaur petroglyphs, Peruvian Mexican dinosaur artifacts, the burial stones, the cat track and the hammer, and that's a whole lot more than a single geographic inconsistency, and I think the implication is just as they suggested: it demolishes. It is, the column itself is an abstraction that's put together based on the assumption of evolution, useful as a model that we can test against the real world, and when we do, we find it fails. It is contradicted. It's not proof, it is demonstration of what ought to be that isn't. And let's conclude with a statement by Nova, who came to Glen Rose, looked at the same pictures that you looked at. The people that photographed it and interviewed us were excited. They thought they had some earth-shaking news and went back, and their editor wouldn't allow them to publish it. They did publish a brief presentation called God, Darwin, and the Dinosaurs, and mentioned dinosaur footprints side by side with humans. Finding them would counter evidence, they said, that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct, which is, of course, what's taught in the textbooks. It would counter that and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. Nova knows what that means. And therefore, they said in this blurb, there's nothing at Glen Rose that looks anything like a footprint, a human footprint. Now, you can decide for yourself whether that's true. If there's something there that does look like, and we've shown that there are human footprints there and that that's the most reasonable conclusion, then this is what it means, according to the evolutionists themselves.